Okay, what we're going to look at here is assembly of a Brawn reel. Starting off with the two halves of the body. These have been machined and anodised in silver. All these are going to be a 4.9 to 1 ratio. First thing that happens is these offset cams allow us to adjust for different ratios they're going to be fitted. On the left hand side of the body there's two indexing marks. The top indexing marks for 4.9 to 1, the bottom indexing marks for 4.1 to 1, depending on which gear ratio set we fit. At the moment they're all being made at 4.9 to 1. So these will get bonded in with a permanent Loctite as a sleeve fit. Once they're set, they take 24 hours to set. They can never be removed. So once that's done, gear set in a body at this stage gets assembled as a complete set. That gear set and body will follow from the beginning all the way to the end of the process. First thing is the pinion gear is 400 series stainless, which is extremely strong and extremely tough and extremely hard. And the main gear is aluminium bronze, which is extremely tough and extremely hard, and they're both very hard wearing. Aluminium bronze to stainless is very slippery, so it requires minimal lubrication. Both gears are precision cut to meet each other. The tolerance for fitment of the two axes across and through is 1/1000th of a millimetre. So in order to get a perfectly smooth gear feeling with no backlash, what's required is that the two parts have to be lapped together so that they're a perfect fit. The way that's done is that the main gear has lapping paste put into the teeth. This gets inserted into the body with that pinion gear. Okay, gear lapping. All these have had their main gear and pinion gear installed, and the body is temporarily clamped together with two screws, so that those gears are exactly where they're going to be in the finished reel. First thing that happens is a temporary one-way bearing housing is fitted, which will bring both gears into exact alignment, how it's going to be in the finished reel. Bolt on a temporary rotor. This one's obviously been used about a few hundred times. This is so we can spin it up. So now what we've got is a reel. It doesn't sound very nice because it's full of lapping paste on the two main parts. Okay, although it might seem fairly crude, it has to be done by feel. Doing it on a machine removes the feeling. Basically the process is done until the gears feel smooth. This process goes on for 1.5 minutes. As it's going, you can feel the gears getting smoother just from the vibration in the body. Now at this stage we can tell how smooth the gears are going to be just by connecting a handle. How smooth it's going to be. That one's going to be very good. Okay, so the next process is to pull it all apart. First step, remove all the lapping paste. So that one-way bearing insert's been polished to a mirror finish. That actually keep the noise down of the one-way bearing, because one-way bearings do tend to be a bit noisy, especially when they're good. Okay, so normally this is done in batches of 5 in a tray, usually around 40 to 70 at a time. We push out the bearing that was used during lapping because it's probably contaminated, so we reuse those bearings for lapping only. The new bearing, push that in. Next thing is the oscillation cam bush, which is an erdolite plastic, which generally doesn't need to ever be replaced. So for a first time build, each one is reamed to an exact fit to match the machine shaft that it sits on. You can see there it's just a nice fit. And then we put that into the oscillation cam gear. That just sits on nice and freely. This is the retaining screw. It's aluminium, so it's quite soft. It is anodised, but it's still quite soft. There's a flat blade screwdriver that fits right properly. Don't over tighten this screw. It's actually self-tightening, so if it ever came loose in the reel, you have to just tighten itself up again. So it's just there to prevent the gear from sliding backwards and forwards. And there's about 0.1mm clearance in and out there. Next thing is the retaining plate for the cam. There's two different size screws. They're both M4, but one has a long head and one has a short head to clear the gears. You'll see what I mean when I put the main gears in. So get that one started in the right hand corner. Then you've got the one that's been ground quite short, a little bit shorter than the other one. And then you do this one all the way up, nice and tight. And then this one do up nice and tight. And that's your cam retaining plate fitted. Okay, next thing is your rubber seal. Starting at the top of the reel, it's where your joint's going to be. Start it off, and then butt the two ends together, and then run your finger around and push the seal in. The seal's longer than it needs to be, and that squashes the two flat ends together on the seal, making it perfectly waterproof. Alright, so that's the main body done, ready for the gears. The main gear and main gear shaft has to have a new bearing fitted. Now make sure that the rubber seals underneath each bearing, and also the bearings are rubber sealed. Underneath the bearing you have to push that down, and you have to make sure that it sits down on the seat and it's not hanging up. There shouldn't be any gap there, and then just check that there's no interference between the screw heads and the bearing. That's all nice and free. The other main thing is a lot of the assembly is done dry. Makes it nice and easy. Okay, your next part, now paint the one-way bearing, the pinion gear with oil. Just drop that into there, make sure it fits. It's nice and neat. And rotates nice and freely. Okay. Small amount of non-permanent Loctite. This is actually a sealer as well. So it sort of does two jobs at the same time. New one-way bearing housing. It already has the bearing pressed into it. 12 needle rollers all up. So it's a very strong bearing. There's an O-ring seal at the bottom. Okay, two faces are clean. Just slide that down, and that will locate. Now, fitting the one-way bearing housing, it's important to make sure it goes in a nice relaxed fit. So just start these two screws off. Alright, so that's a nice relaxed fit. Then fit the main support bearing. Then pinch both of those two screws up, and that whole assembly now is in a nice relaxed position, and it'll rotate quite freely. Next part is the rotor spacer. Sit that on there. Now that has a rubber seal, so you just push the rubber seal into the groove. Second rubber seal is a 35 by 1 mil O-ring. Push that into the groove. Now this is quite important. For a new seal, it needs to be lubricated. Best lubrication for rubber is silicone. Furniture polish has silicone in it, and that'll work quite well until the seal beds in. Once the seal's bedded in, it won't need any lubrication. Okay, so the one-way bearing retainer self-locates, so there's no need to worry about locating with the seal exactly, because it'll do it itself. Put 2 screws opposite. Okay, so that's that started. Always start your threads off by hand, so you don't cross thread anything, because if you cross thread something, you're up for new parts. Now, the rubber seal's in constant tension here, so these screws are always under positive pressure. Okay, so that's your one-way bearing housing assembled, and your pinion gear. So that's that part of it done. Next part we need is the cam and the spool shaft. Make sure the 2 parts go together quite easily, nice and free. Check the shaft fits in the pinion gear nice and freely, no interference, not too tight or anything like that, because parts can be different tolerances. If you're buying spare parts or replacing a part for whatever reason, you'll always receive a low tolerance part, so it's guaranteed to fit. Paint some oil onto the bearings of the cam. The 2 bearings are screwed on, and paint some oil into the slot, the S-curve, and drop that onto the oscillation cam bush that fits in there nicely. So you can just put it in at an angle and then just turn it and make sure that the cam is down the bottom. Next part is take your main gear and your pinion gear and make sure those 2 parts fit nice and freely together, not too tight, and then drop the pinion gear into the body where it's going to be sitting, just to get it started on lubrication. Drop that through the pinion gear and then through the bearing hole, and then twist the gear shaft backwards and forwards until it locates. Now the teeth are all engaged. Take the spool shaft, which is 416 stainless. It's been hardened, so it's quite strong, but it's also flexible enough that if you do load it up, it's not going to bend. It'll always spring back into shape. And then, okay, so you've painted your spool shaft, slide it in, slide it down, and then gradually rotate it, and you'll feel the key at the bottom of the shaft engage with the cam, and it won't rotate anymore. Just hold a little bit of pressure on the shaft, just a little bit, and then just grab an Allen key or a small screwdriver, providing it's clean of course, and line it up with the shaft, and just push the shaft. So now that shaft is keyed into the cam. Next part is the 2 countersunk screws which hold the spool shaft to the cam. Do these up nice and tight. Tight enough that it feels like it's stretching the bolt. Okay, so that's that part done. Next part is Loctite in the 2 bottom screws, not in the top screw, because your top screw is your lubrication port. If you take the screw out of the body, you can inject oil into it and it'll inject itself into the rest of the reel. Now this thread locker sealer will also be used a small amount around the inside of the outside of the bearing housing on the side plate. That's instead of using a shim. It's far more accurate. Reels that are being rebuilt will have to use shims to adjust the gear mesh. Push the 2 halves together. Take 3 of the countersunk screws, and just drop them into place. Now just start off all 3 screws, don't actually do any one of them up first, just get them all started. That locates the side plate in exactly the right position. Doing one up first will upset the alignment of the gears. So pinch them up bit by bit, and then finally go around and make sure they're completely tight. Won't go any further. Now this you won't have to worry about. This is the set screw for the gear backlash. Can only be used once. Obviously this has been done in the factory. This is something you wouldn't have to worry about. All it does is maintain pressure on the bearing while everything's setting. Take your shaft seal, make sure it slides up there nice and freely. Paint a little bit of oil on there. Take your rotor nut, and then grab your rotor. Slide the rotor over the hole, over the shaft, locate it, and it'll sit down nicely on there. The rotor nut is left hand thread. It also has a bearing inside it. That bearing, that small sleeve, the seal, sits inside the bearing, so that the bearing itself is not actually in contact with metal. It's only it's insulated from the 2 parts, and it's pretty much never needs replacing. And it's left hand thread, so make sure that the thread's square and not skewed. If it's skewed, undo it and start again, because if you cross thread the nut, you'll need a new nut. Make sure that's nice and tight. An 11/16 spanner is a perfect size. Then hold the bottom without putting too much pressure on it. Just check the handle, looking for free play. There shouldn't be any. Should be just okay. So now what we do is we wait 24 hours for all those Loctite fittings to set, and then what we do is we take a reel that was done the day before and we pre-run the gears. So this one's already had time to set, so now what we've got is a tool that will fit on low speed on a cordless drill. High speed will actually spin the rotor too fast and potentially damage the rotor by bending it. Start it off on slow speed and bring it up to a speed. That's probably a little bit. We can go a little bit faster than that without damaging the rotor. What happens if you spin a rotor too fast? The aluminium, the inertia will actually bend the rotor outwards. It's not designed to bend outwards, it's designed to take resistance inwards. So we run that for about 30 seconds and that should spin nice and freely. And then we take a handle, and there should be no backlash, very small amount of backlash there. And these are reels that we finished earlier on. They've all got to go through their final checks. And then once they've had their final check, then they'll go through cleaning.